Welcome, everyone. This is a special class on organizational change and development. We discuss a variety of topics. Today, we're going to focus on leadership, leadership required for implementing transformational change in an organization. My name is Dr. John Jactiani. I'm pleased to be here with you to discuss this important topic. Leadership is critical in many things, many aspects of business, of course, but we have learned over time and experience that competent leadership is absolutely necessary to implement change successfully. The rest of the company, the suppliers, the customers, look for leadership, look for guidance, look for encouragement, look for enablement, all of the things that go hand in hand with good leadership. So leadership is paramount in implementing change. Many have questioned whether leadership matters. If we know what we have to do and we know what we have to change in an organization, why or how important is leadership? Many think, and of course, in part they're right, that economic conditions, historical forces, competitive landscape, tech changes, many things happen that are beyond the leader's control. So why then is leadership so critical? We simply can resolve to respond to these external stimulants. We also have viewpoints that talk about environment and how environment drives change. In fact, there have been many studies done that leadership have very little to do with actually implementing the change. It's largely attributed to environment. Also, the way an organization changes, some have argued, really depends on how it has historically changed or the culture that's imbibed in the organization. How were past decisions made? How were past challenges addressed? And there is a theory behind organizational change that says that we just follow suit. We follow the culture and things get taken care of. Much of this, and there's research that shows that some of that and many of those points are actually true. While leaders don't necessarily explain all of the successful change efforts that have transpired, we have many studies that support the fact that leadership have directly added benefit in implementing the change, or leaderships have direct leadership strategies, the personas that fill certain leadership role have directly attributed to positive outcomes for a firm. For example, in one study, they were able to prove systematically that 44% of the variance, almost half the variance of the profits in the stock price that rose, was attributed to leadership. Though it's very hard to attribute success to leadership, it is much more easier to attribute failure to lack of leadership. We've seen that, and it's been shown in many studies. Let's just define what leadership is so we can explore this topic a little further. We define leadership for our purposes as an act of making something happen, a state that a firm goes through to another state that the firm aspires to be at Leadership can be defined as the act of making that happen or facilitating that change. Now, we use the word leader and manager interchangeably, but are leaders and managers the same? Let's explore. If we think about certain dimensions that we look for in our management, in our leadership, we might look for promotion of goals, setting of goals. We might look for how our leadership or our management looks upon as work effort. What are the conceptions of work? How do they relate work to the goals that they've helped set for the organization? Third dimension is, how do they interact? How do they relate to people and members of the organization? And what kind of persona do they exhibit? What kind of example do they set? Leaders are personal, personable. Leaders take project ideas and excite people to join the journey, whereas managers on the court are more perceived as or viewed as coordinators. They facilitate, they tactically execute some of the plans, but leaders inspire. They work side by side. So other involvements or other dimensions address the emotional aspect. How emotionally tied are they to the firm's beliefs? What about their personal life? How separate or coordinated is their personal life? Do they say one thing at work and maybe do something else outside of work? We've seen that in recent times in the news and in media. A leader achieves commitment by inspiration. They don't force involvement, they make people want to get involved. Very often, good leaders will exhibit the company values. There is no difference between their work and personal life. How they feel about certain important social issues come out the same, whether they're in their personal endeavors or at a professional setting. They lead with vision, whereas managers are task-oriented and task masters. Other distinctions. Leaders tend to have longer range plans. Managers are very tactical. Managers tend to fix problems. Leaders tend to create bigger problems to solve so their firm and their company and the employees that work for the company and their partners can grow by solving those problems. It's interesting, right? It's interesting. We look to leaders to solving problems, but in fact, leaders create new growth opportunities, which in and of itself stretch the organization and sometimes are viewed as problems, but they're opportunities. They look at problems as opportunities. Leaders are starters of change by that same token. They're not afraid of risk-taking. They're also not afraid, they're not penalizing those who take risks and perhaps fail. They are encouraging people to take risks to help grow together. They have inductive reasoning skills. They exhibit inductive reasoning skills, whereas a manager tends to be deductive in the approach. Leaders exhibit passion, intuition. So I want to stop here for a minute and assign a reinforcement question to those who are listening and taking this class. Think about, have you encountered a person who demonstrates manager-like behaviors that we just discussed? Share an example of a manager and a leader type behavior that anyone has exhibited that you might have seen. It could be a professor, an old boss, or a current boss, or a teacher of the past, or anyone in your lives. I want you to share an example by way of this reinforcement question. If we look at this table, I've tried to summarize some of the distinctions further. Leaders are strategic in their approach. They can be aggressive because they want to push the envelope. Managers tend to be passive. They're very task-oriented, like we mentioned. Now, these are not US distinctions. Notice this is how culturally China views leaders and managers. So the leader-manager framework is very culture dependent, and it evolves. You can see a lot of similarities. You can see some particular differences. Same thing here. These are additional leader-managers distinctions from the way this textbook has gathered information from China's management teams. Here we can look at the same from Great Britain. Most companies in Great Britain use leader-manager terminology slightly differently. Very similar to the United States and many other countries, of course, but a little bit different. I like the one that says leader is romantic versus a manager which is prosaic. Leader is principled, a manager is pliable. So it's very interesting terminology, but sort of leading to the same cultural difference. Once again, here's some more. Here's one that I can relate to: self-starting versus externally directed, right? Leaders don't wait around for their management to say, go do something. They know they're part of the solution. They do. They don't wait. Therefore, they earn respect. They don't have to demand obedience, whereas a manager who's managing to tasks, managing to a timeline, managing to a set of deliverables may or may not necessarily have the ownership feeling that a leader exhibits. Leaders open to ideas from a team. Managers tend to be, in contrast, focused on the tasks, less open to new ideas, more open to execution of the ideas that have been laid out. So if we talk about leadership versus authority, that starts to put another angle on the differences. Authority talks about the right to. You have the right, you have the power. But leadership isn't only about power, it's about exhibiting influence. Or authority, if we look at it from a top down or bottom up perspective. From above, it's due to a role or a position. From below, it's one's authority is either sanctioned or withheld from below. Or from within, it can come from within. What do we feel like we're authorized to do? Are we empowered? Do we feel empowered in our organization? So we evaluate individual capacity to assume his or her own authority. But leadership involves authority from below and from within. It's about gaining followership. It's about transforming and transacting. It's about creating influence. Now, Bass in 1988 talked about MLQ, multi-leadership questionnaire. He started to put a framework around leadership. He believed that leadership and charisma go hand in hand because there's this concept of idealized influence, right? People look up to charismatic leaders. They look up to role models. They're admired, respected. They've got to be able to walk the talk. Followers identify with them and they want to emulate them. They want to copy them. And we've seen that, right? Like good leaders with charisma, like Steve Jobs. I mean, there have been so many people trying to copy Steve Jobs over the years because he fits this mold, right? Charismatic, risk taker, you know, generated a lot of influence very quickly, had high moral values and conduct, set standards really high. People look up to that. The MLQ also talks about inspiration. How inspirational is the leader? Will the leader provide meaning and challenge? Is he or she team spirited? Will he cultivate that team spirit across the organization? How about communication? Clear communicator. A committed person, committed to the goals that were set, not wishy-washy. Stimulation, intellectual stimulation. Leader urges followers to be innovative and creative, question assumptions, reframe problems. Learn from old situations, don't repeat them. Use the historical information to learn, not copy, not do things just because we did it before. And the leader does not criticize people in public. For individual consideration, the leader pays very close attention to the needs of his or her organization and almost always serves as a mentor or coach. Again, MLQ, I can't stress this enough, focused on charisma, charismatic and inspirational motivation. Bass even went on to call it charismatic inspirational leadership. He defined it, he coined that term. Charismatic leadership, however, may help, but it's not the only thing, or it's not absolutely required to implement organizational change successfully. For organizational change to be implemented successfully, persistence is required, drive, self-awareness, self-reflection, and having a clear vision of where you're headed and the journey that lies ahead has to be crystal clear, and the leader has to set that example. especially in the early parts, right? Especially in the early parts, leadership and sponsorship from your topmost executives is critical. I've seen many change programs, even large-scale systems implementations fail because the leaders are not committed. They figured, oh, it's a system change, the organization will implement, we can just go do what we normally do. And it makes a big impact. Anytime executive sponsorship of a large-scale initiative has been shown over and over again as the #1 criteria for change implementation success. And why is this? Because, first of all, the organizations that we're working with and that we're part of have become increasingly complex. There are many more processes, many more people, much more transitional steps that are happening in order for the organization to grow and be successful. Many competitive threats. So the complexity has increased. Now, Jackson Clements in the late 80s and early 90s created a stratified system theory about change. They said there has to be a causal map, there has to be a connection or rationale for collective action. Otherwise, the change is not going to be taken seriously. This is basically saying you've got to give us the why. Why are we going to change? What is the connection between doing the change or doing the change program and success for the company? We got to make sure that there aren't too many levels in the organization, but if there are, there's no more than 7. Their research concluded that the open systems theory is much aligned to how organizational change works from the inside out. Great leaders that can spearhead these change programs successfully have a combination of technical, interpersonal, and conceptual skills. They can't be afraid of technology because we've got a lot of technology that's part of almost every change initiative. And they have to be able to relate to people, and they have to get bigger concepts and put them down or break them down into smaller pieces for their employees and for the people they inspire. They further went on to say, well, look, the lower ranks of the management, this is even more important because that's where a lot of the work gets done and a lot of the work components are defined. Analytical thinking and intelligence is important, but it's even more important in the higher levels of the organization because they drive the technology change. They drive other staff members, right? So putting the bigger picture and figuring out how things work together. Leadership has to be able to do that at the senior most levels of the organization. Leader plays multiple roles, right? Emotional intelligence. They classify emotional intelligence as the single biggest criteria for leadership success through a change program. A leader has to be able to adapt to many situations that are going to be presenting themselves through the change program. And strong emotional intelligence is required to prevent steering away from the vision, to enable laser focus on the work that lies ahead. How do leaders make decisions? Well, very systematically, very coolly, very calmly, and in a way that brings people along through the journey. It's crucial that leaders maintain a strong level of alignment between the organizational that they support and the environment that the organization sits in. So they've got to be able to monitor the environment. They've got to analyze problems from inside, outside. They've got to be able to listen to their staff. They've got to be able to seek opportunity even in adversarial situations. We see examples of that right now with the pandemic and how companies are stepping up and actually seeking lots of opportunities. You've got companies that are making ventilators that have nothing to do with healthcare or the ventilator biotech business, but they're adapting. We've got car manufacturers adapting to making medical equipment because there's a need and there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to do social service, but there's also opportunity to gain a lot of goodwill and hopefully that'll account to better profits later. So a leader, needless to say, is a very dynamic person. A successful leader or a strong leader is a very dynamic person with charisma, with capability, with emotional intelligence, with interpersonal skills, with technical skills, with analytical skills. Obviously, good leaders are hard to find. And they generally get cultivated and grow through time. That's why organizations hire senior people. Oftentimes they target them in their own organization and help develop them until they're ready to take that bigger role in their organization. Very difficult to hire all of these incongruents with the company that you're trying to run. But oftentimes you have to hire from outside. That's okay. But if it was up to me, I would cultivate leadership qualities from within. So, you can always target people and coach people, but you can't have them learn cognitive skills overnight. This is something that, smart people possess, and it's hard to grow cognitive skills organically. Functional expertise can be fostered a little more easily, I guess, because you can have people work through different roles, different areas, and learn about many steps in a manufacturing process before they become the head of manufacturing, et cetera. So you can gain functional knowledge, but be able to put things together cognitively, those are skills that are developed from over a lifetime. The leader's primary role is to develop a vision, right? And motivate followers using all of those skills that we've been discussing, from charisma to cognitive to emotional intelligence. Eminent leaders, you can see this. Pick 5 leaders that come to the top of your mind around the world. You'll see that leadership is a choice. These people made a choice to be effective leaders. They weren't just appointed, they grew to those levels and earned that credibility. Good leaders, you'll find in the examples that you might select, are motivated a lot more by desire than by anything else. And many leaders that come to my mind as I share with you my notes on this topic is empathy. These leaders that I'm having in my mind empathize with the people they were leading or the cause they were leading for. They were very passionate. They got it, and they made others get it. Storytelling is an amazing skill that good leaders have and often use in their tool set. A normal leader might relate a traditional story, maybe from the past or maybe something current. They make it somewhat animated. An innovative leader relates a latent story. And a visionary leader creates a new story, a story that no one's heard. But all of these stories have to be inspirational because that's the job of the leader, right? We discussed that. It needs, because they have to inspire, they must engage some sort of emotion. So storytelling is about engaging emotion. So you start a story with a balanced outlook, and then you create an inciting event to create an imbalance, a cause for change perhaps, a cause for action. And the leader, through that storytelling experience, accomplishes a few things as he or she goes along. He talks about the imbalance and then starts to talk about or give clues or lead the audience to a way to restore balance. They talk about barriers to restoring that balance. What's keeping us from doing this? When should we act? How should we act? Who are the actors? And if this leader who's telling this story is telling a story in the way that's not believable, well, that's going to diminish the value of that story. So he or she has to relate this story and all of the actions that embody it in a believable, credible manner. If people don't think it's true, it's going to be a big turnoff and it's going to backfire. So storytelling is an art. It gets better over time. And we've seen good leaders do that, right? We've seen so many good leaders discuss stories or develop stories even on the fly just to be able to relate their point better in a more personal way. The final thing I want to just put to your attention is Howard Gardner, in his Changing Minds book, discussed 7 factors or levers to promote change. First said, you got to have a reason for change. You got to communicate that. It better be done based on good research, both external and internal to your organization. There has to be resonance. People have to get it. It has to resonate. It has to be descriptive. Maybe redefine or redescribe the state, the current state and the to-be state, perhaps. You've got to talk about how we're going to get the change done. What are the resources? Who's going to be impacted in the organization? What are the rewards? What's in it for the company? What's in it for the management team? What's in it for the people? What's in it for the individual? Is the change aligned with real-world events? Is there a reason for this change? Does it fit in the overall structure of the world we live in? Or does it sound like a fairy tale? And then the final and last but not least is the 7th factor to promote change is identifying the resistance early on so you can address those resistance areas. And there will be large-scale transformation problems, a lot of resistance. That's why they're large-scale and transformational. They would just be a minor blip if it wasn't a large-scale transformational project. We're talking about transformational change here. And so resistance has to be not only anticipated, but it has to be calculated as well as planned for. So I hope this made some sense around how important leadership is and some of the models that can be used and some of the frameworks that many researchers have come up with over time that I've been able to share. There's a second reinforcement question in this module that I'd like you to ponder and do. As we go through the pandemic right now, the COVID-19 situation is top of mind at this time. Life will not be the same for many companies, really any company, which survives this pandemic crisis. In fact, many small companies are projected to fold. They won't exist in a few months. But many will. They'll survive. They've got good balance sheets, good business models. But we know that any organizations that will survive most likely will have to do a lot of change because they would have either gotten so impacted by this, or they can't let this kind of situation cripple their business quite in the same way. So whatever the reason or impetus for change, it's safe to say that many organizations will embark on mid to large change efforts somehow once they get their feet off the ground, on the ground. So I want you to select an organization, any organization, which is likely to survive in your opinion. How might it change? Describe that. And then describe the 3 factors or levers, any 3 from the 7 that we've discussed, which such an organization that you're thinking of can use to promote the change. I want you to just give me a couple of paragraphs, no more than a page on the top end, a couple of paragraphs will suffice. Okay? So thank you so much for listening, and I bid you well until the next module.